Hi everyone, thanks for joining me once again for another set of Saturday morning stories. Okay, if you're a regular to my channel, you know I haven't been around for a few weeks. I pre-recorded a bunch of stories so that you would get a regular supply of the stories on a Saturday. My daughters visited me here from the UK and we had a great week, but I was very, very tired when they went back, a lot of running around. So normal service have been resumed, as they say. Right, okay, so today I've got 5 stories for you and a little bit of a bonus warning on the end, so you could say 6 really. But before we get into stories, one of the questions that comes up very, very often, people say to me, they say, Peter, do you believe that every one of these stories that get sent in to you are genuine? Do you think some people make them up? And you know what? It's not really for me to vet the stories. People send them in and I read them out and I basically leave the decision whether it's a real story or whether it's not to the viewer. I think 99.9% of them are true. And I'll tell you why, because of the obvious fakes that come in. Sometimes people use these bots, these AI programs that can write stories, but they're just not the same, because when they write the stories, they're not the same as the real story. When a guy pours his heart out, if he's had a bad situation happen to him, or even on the other side of the coin, if the guy's extremely happy, got married and had kids, there's a lot more personal feelings come out in the stories. And I think the average person out there who's listening to these stories with some intelligence, somewhat level of intelligence, will realise that most of the stories here are genuine, and the obvious fakes I kind of whittle out at the beginning. But other than that, I don't vet them. It's up to you to decide whether they're real or not. I personally think most of them are. That's my opinion anyway. So let's get on with the first of 5 stories today.
สวัสดีค่ะ
I met my Thai partner in my Western home country when I was 24. She was 30 and hot. She had a 13-year-old daughter from her previous Thai partner, and she had moved abroad to work and send money home to support her parents and daughter, who said she had left her with her parents. She was honest, all this from the start, and she never asked me to support them. I had Japanese, Indian, Filipino girlfriends when I was younger, but this was my first Thai girl, and I was instantly hooked. Thai girls really know how to take care of a man. The year after we had been together, she took me to meet her family and travel around Thailand. I had been to the Philippines and Bali before, but never Thailand, which was completely different, and I loved it. She took me to a ping pong show in Pat Pong, and I couldn't believe it. I had never seen anything like this before. We bought one of the girls a few drinks, and after she darted the balloons above my head, this girl had some skills. After the show, we took her out for dinner, and I thought my partner was going to ask her back to the hotel, but that didn't happen. We were still in the honeymoon period, so it didn't bother me. We had a child together the following year, and unfortunately, before we could get back to Thailand to introduce the new grandchild, her father passed away suddenly from a heart attack. He was a provider for my partner's daughter and stepmom. My partner decided to sell their apartment and bring her daughter and stepmom to my home country and live with us. We had another child together, and grandma would look after the kids while we worked. Fast forward 30 years and I planned a trip to Thailand with some friends, but I was solo. I was like a kid in a candy store. I had been to Thailand over a dozen times over the years with my family, but never alone. Our first go-go bar was Baccarat in Soicowboy, and wow, that is still my favourite bar ever. About 2 weeks later, we went to Pattaya, where I met a massage girl and took her back to my hotel for drinks. She was cute and a nice little thing and knew how to play the game. I broke the 3-day rule and we stayed together for 4 days. Big mistake, as I started to fall for her. We kept in touch through the Line app, and she tried sinking her hooks in deeper, but I was smarter than that. I did some investigations on social media and found her Facebook page where she had posted her business and everyday life, etc. I found out that she had a tomboy girlfriend living together, so I deleted the app, and that was that. And that's basically that. That's the end of the first story. No comments on that from me, so let's dive straight into the second story. I have been an avid viewer of your channel ever since my son, who I'll call James, turned me onto your YouTube channel. We used to watch it like clockwork together. This story is about James communicating with a so-called good Thai girl that we met on ThaiCupid. They would talk every day on a FaceTime. James was crazy about her. She told James that she had 2 kitchen jobs and was self-employed. With that knowledge, he assumed that she didn't work in a bar. James was looking forward to the time when he could travel to Thailand to meet her in person. According to this girl, she was divorced and had 2 daughters. Her youngest daughter lived with the girl's father and he wouldn't share custody, but she was tasked with driving her daughter to school and back each day. This and a few other reasons raised the red flag in my mind, and I shared my suspicions with James, which he dismissed as a figment of my imagination. My son lived with me as he was disabled and he couldn't work. He was waiting for Social Security to start paying him monthly allowance so he could have enough money to go to Thailand. Even though James was debt-free and I was paying for his living expenses, he kept asking for money to pay for his various phantom charges, his bills. I questioned James about this, but he always had a plausible excuse. This was another red flag that something just wasn't quite right. So where was the money going? James had so many ailments that he was in and out of hospital for the past year and a half. Last month, he became so sick that he was put on life support. He naturally wasn't able to communicate with his girlfriend, so I phoned her on Facebook and sent her a message informing her about James and the reason he couldn't contact her. She wrote back saying how grateful she was that I had told her, expressed how sorry she was to hear the news, and to tell James that she missed him terribly and loved him with all her heart. I kept her up to date on James' condition every few days. This messaging continued for about a month, each time telling me that she was so worried about James' condition and repeating that she loved him dearly. Recently, James' health took a turn for the worse, and I informed his girlfriend that James was in a serious condition and may not survive. She wrote back saying how she was and that she was praying for his complete recovery. My son passed away in September after going into hospice care where they removed his life support. I wrote to his girlfriend with the news and she appeared to be genuinely heartbroken. A day after her crocodile tears, she messaged me saying her son got a girl pregnant and could I help her out with some money. I wrote back informing her that I knew she didn't have a son and that she was scamming me and that I wouldn't help her with money. She then started texting my daughter begging for money. Both my daughter and I immediately blocked her on Facebook. Now I know my son was frequently asking for money so that he could support this money-grabbing scam artist. So you see, it isn't only the bar girls or the go-go girls or the freelancers. It is the so-called decent Thai girls that can also try to scam you for whatever they can get. Just use caution and look for any red flags and present themselves to you. You'll get taken to the cleaners if you're not careful. So this is something that happens quite a lot in Thailand. Well, not just Thailand, I suppose all over the world, where people who are looking for money, girls, they put themselves out on social media apps and they can come across as genuine. But once they start asking for money, it's kind of obvious what they're about. But for a guy who was in that situation, obviously he wasn't in the best of health. He was obviously lonely, I would guess, and he just wanted a girlfriend, you know, and somebody was giving him attention. He believed these stories and he sent her money. Unfortunately, he passed away. I don't think there's anything wrong with giving girls here money if they're your friends and you want to help them out. I know guys who'll send a couple of $1,000 to a girlfriend here, not because they're idiots or simps or, you know, anything like that. They've just got a kind of even a friendship relationship with some of these girls. And sometimes it might be a birthday or they help them out with $1,000 or $2,000. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But once you get a girl who's constantly, you know, giving excuses for money, you know, my mother's sick, my brother's motorbike's broken down, you know, all this sort of garbage. I just think it's time to walk on, you know. I mean, these stories are a great lesson for anybody who hasn't been here before. Okay, let's jump into story number 3. I discovered your channel about 7 months ago and only wish would have been a few years earlier. I enjoy the stories and have learned a lot about how naive I was. I've just turned 57 and have been married for 32 years and together with my wife for a total of 38 years. We have 3 grown adult children and a granddaughter who is the light of our lives. I have worked for my current employer for over 30 years and during that time I also served in the Reserve Guard military for 23 years. About 7 years ago, my wife had her 3rd affair and since then, I refer to our living situation as cohabiting peacefully. Getting a divorce at the time was not as easy as some would think. We both have an extreme need to take care of our family, even if we're not necessarily together. I started planning my exit from the US at that time though. While on a few active duty deployments in the military, I travelled to a number of countries outside the US, and I knew I might not stay here after retirement. In January of 2020, I had scheduled a 14-day food tour in Vietnam for the following April. I needed a break from the normal grind of life, both work and home. Unfortunately, by March of 2020, the world changed and the tour was cancelled. Fast forward to September of 2021, and the Phuket Sandbox, I made my first trip to Thailand for 14 days. Vietnam was still having issues and they were not issuing tourist visas. The minute I stepped off the plane, I was in love with Thailand. I stayed in a resort hotel that had 470 rooms, but during my stay, there were only 32 rooms occupied. It was crazy to see 70 to 80% of businesses closed. No alcohol, sales in the bars or restaurants, and most beaches with just a handful of people on them. I just stayed near my resort and took in a few local tours. This trip did not include any girls. The following September 2022, I returned to Thailand for my second trip for a month. This trip would include Bangkok, Koh Samui, Phuket, and then on to Bangkok again. On my fourth night in Bangkok, I went to dinner with a social media group I was a member of. We met at a bar on Soi 8 and had dinner and drinks, and later a few of us ended up going to Nana Plaza for one last drink. At one of the clubs, one of my friends from the group was familiar with the management and the girls. I was introduced to a beautiful Thai girl and was instantly smitten. I'll call her Pri. She was 37 years old, but I would have thought 25 at the most. I'm not a huge drinker, so in my intoxicated state, I bar-fined her for the rest of the night. This was the first time ever that I even thought of staying away from my wife. We get a taxi and headed to my hotel. The aerobics were quite awkward for me, as I have never strayed from my wife, and even thought although it had been nearly 7 years that I'd been with a woman, I couldn't get it out of my head that I was cheating for the first time on my wife. Another issue was having to wear protection, which I hadn't had to do in some 37 years. Pri decided after a few hours she would go back to the bar to work, but promised to return when done. The first no-no. We exchanged WhatsApp info and I went to sleep expecting her to wake up the next day and leave for Koh Samui. To my surprise, she did return, but at around 4 a.m. Another short aerobic session, and then we talked for a while. She spoke very good English and told me about how she had recently gotten divorced and had a 2-year-old daughter that the father, her ex, had taken back to Denmark to live with him and his mother. She showed me pictures and even showed me her passport for Italy, as they had lived there for 3 years before the divorce. Her ex's father was Italian and divorced from his mother, who was from Denmark. I was head over heels at this point, and I asked her to come with me for the rest of my trip, mistake number 2. She declined but said she could in about a week. I later learned that it was because it was almost her monthly ladies' days. We stayed in contact while I was in Koh Samui, and then I bought her a plane ticket to Phuket to meet me when I left Samui. While in Koh Samui, she sent me photos of her Thai passport ID card and email address so I could set her up for a flight to Phuket. While armed with this info, I did a little research on social media. I found her social media page, and everything she told me was true. There were quite a few years of photos, posts and her travels. She had even posted photos of their Thai marriage certificate from about 7 years prior and the divorce certificate, which was only about 6 months before we met. We had a wonderful time in Phuket and then back in Bangkok. I fell in love with her. After so many years with my wife, her affairs and not having any physical contact with a woman in the past 7 years until now, I was in heaven. The day I left Bangkok to go back home seemed to be the worst day of my life. I did give Pri 30,000 baht on our last day. She had originally told me she would need 15k to come with me for the work she would miss. I paid her bar fine of 7,000 baht, in which I actually went to the bar to do so. We agreed to stay in contact, and within days of getting home, I told Pri I was coming back to retire in Thailand at the end of next year and I wanted to be with her. I told her I didn't want her working in the bar. She told me that she wanted to be only with me and that no one had ever treated her as well as I did. Mistake number 3. She said if she didn't work in the bar, she would need money for her living expenses and her family. I agreed to send her 35,000 baht per month. Mistake number 4. That would be 15k for her family and 20k for her living expenses. She would always send me copies of all the bills to prove that what she owed. By the end of March of 2023, after only 6 months, I had sent her approximately 17,000 US dollars. I was now out of money that I could easily hide from my wife and had put about 5,000 US on a personal credit card. Many mistakes made during this time. Her father's truck had broken down. Her friend needed help getting back to Bangkok from Phuket, where her boyfriend left her behind. A friend in the hospital then had to pay the bills before she could leave. She wanted to go back to school so she could get a better job. She asked for help to go see her daughter over Christmas, 150,000 baht. She never went because her visa to Denmark was denied and the visa agent took all the money. She wanted to start a mushroom farm, and so on and on it went. I was so stupid. I told her I couldn't do this anymore. I felt extreme guilt that I had given her false hope and had told her I would return and take care of her, eventually get her daughters back to Thailand. My heart was broken because I was so stupid and I cared so much for her. Our last conversation in early April 23 was painful, but I couldn't continue and we said goodbye. The money I lost was to be for a non-A retirement visa requirement. I have only saved up about half of that money as I write this now. I might only be able to get a 6 months multiple entry visa at this point, but I should be able to get 9 months out of it with a few short trips out of Thailand and extensions every 60 days. I have learned so much from you and the stories as well as from a number of other YouTubers. Thank you for what you do, and thanks to the many men and the few women who've submitted their stories as well. I'm returning to Bangkok in February of 2024. I hope to buy you a drink and or dinner, and thank you in person. This story will be exclusive to you as well. Okay, so it's a bit sad, isn't it? And a lot of guys will watch this video and think, you know, how stupid were you to send all that money? But guys get kind of reeled in, you know, they fall in love with a girl and they start believing stories. But one thing you've got to remember, I've mentioned this lots and lots of times here, you know, a typical family here in Thailand, especially if she comes from up in Isan, a salary that will keep all of them, you know, anywhere between 10, 12, even 14,000 baht maximum. When girls start asking for 30, 40, 50,000 baht a month, it should, you know, set off a lot of red flags because it's just, you know, and then also she's asking for little bonuses along the way, like that 150,000. That's the time you should really walk away. I know it's easy for me to say, you know, when you first meet a girl and you do fall into that kind of situation where you'll do anything for her, but there has to be a cut-off point where you say enough is enough. You know, the guy's took himself to the point where he can't even visit Thailand on the original visa where he wanted to. So hopefully he'll work things out and get back eventually one day, and he's learned his lesson now, hopefully, and next time, let's wish him luck for the best time, the next time he visits Thailand. Right, let's get into story number 4. I'm not a person that hangs around in bars much, so here is an old story about how I tried to find my Thai princess. This is a tale about trying to date non-bar girls in Thailand. Is it any easier? This story takes place before the internet, email and Facebook existed, snail mail only. Girl 1. I can't remember her name. The first girl lived in Bangkok and I met her from an international singles magazine. The girl was in her mid-20s and I was mid-30s. We traded letters back and forward over a 6-month period and we agreed to meet when I arrived in Thailand. I landed and went to my hotel and called her. Previous experiences of talking to Thai people over the phone had not gone well, so I was a little concerned what the result would be. Much to my surprise, she spoke fairly good English and was nice to talk to. We made a date for the next afternoon at Central to see a movie. I was really looking forward to meeting her. She called me a few more times that night and the next day to hear my voice, she said, and we continued to have stimulated conversations that always ended with a positive vibe. Remember, this was pre-internet days, no Thailand bound for research back then. I had no idea about Thai culture and habits. I went to the meeting point at the cinema at the World Trade Center, as it was called back then, and waited. I was thinking to myself, would she show up? What did she look like? How would we get along? Eventually, a pleasant-looking Thai girl arrived and introduced herself. She had a nice body and short haircut and wore a t-shirt and blue jeans, my favourite 80s look. I said hello, shook her hand. What happened next stunned me and still shakes me to this day. 4 tall Thai boys arrived on the scene, her friends from university, apparently. I could have fallen over backwards. Talk about an awkward spot to be put in. I said, "You want me to pay for all of them?" To which she answered, "Yes. The movies in Thailand are not expensive, but just the principle, what was I going to be asked to pay for next?" As the saying goes, if it doesn't feel right, get out, and that's exactly what I did. I shook all the hands and bid farewell, saying to her, "I don't think we are compatible," and I departed the shopping centre as quickly as I could, fearing that her escorts may follow me and beat me up. What a horrible position to be put in. I eventually arrived back at my hotel expecting a few more phone calls from her to explain the situation, but received nothing. That was the end of her. After waiting 6 months to meet her, it was over in the blink of an eye. I guess the lesson there is not to put all your eggs in one basket and plan to meet a few girls. Girl 2, Pun. Yes, her real name short for Ampun. On my now yearly trips to Thailand, I travelled to Chiang Mai on the overnight train and stayed at a very small guest house located in the historic city wall. The female receptionist on the front desk was a short little Thai girl with a very friendly personality. She was very sweet and friendly, but not my taste in women. We started to chat every day and quickly became friends. Each afternoon, Pun and myself spent time sitting outside the front door of the guest house, chatting, sometimes accompanied by a friend of hers that played guitar or the passing motorbike taxi. Chiang Mai was a quiet little town back then, with not a lot happening. Pun worked at the guest house during the day, and at night she worked at the night market. She was very busy. I usually travel to Thailand in April when it is very hot, but the heat never bothered me at that age. I asked Pun why the guest house was so quiet, and she said I was the only guest. They were going to shut the guest house for the hot season after I had left. I had mentioned to Pun I was going to go and explore the countryside soon. She said she had the day off, and if I got a car, we could go together. Pun asked if she could bring some friends, and I said no problem. Next day, myself and 4 Thai girls loaded into the Suzuki and headed off into the wilderness. Remember, these were all non-bar girls and just normal Thai women, very polite, charming, not asking for money, and seeming to really enjoy the small things. Pun seemed to have allergies to everything and could not handle much sun, dirty air, or swimming in natural streams, so it started to limit a bit what we could do. But she was only a friend, and it was only for one day, so it did not really matter. Shortly after our Suzuki safari, it was time for me to leave. I checked out of the guest house and left my backpack at the shop Pun worked at and looked around the night market before leaving on the overnight sleeper train back to Bangkok. Pun and I had said our goodbyes and thought nothing much of it. I enjoyed meeting Pun and enjoyed her friendship, but was not attracted to her, not at all. There was no physical contact at all, and I had never even held her hand. Pun said she would love to come and work in Australia. I asked her what qualifications she had and received the typical Thai answer of, "I can do anything." I mentioned to Pun that she may have a problem with her name in Australia. She said her real name was Ampun, and some Farang had told her her name would be unlucky in Australia and she would get a new name if she ever visited there. At this stage, I had never even heard of Pattaya and had never been there. That had changed by the next trip, and I arrived in Chiang Mai with a bar girl as my companion. When I arrived in Chiang Mai, the guest house was already closed for the hot season, and I had to find another place to stay. No problem there. I went to the night market to catch up with Pun. She was friendly to me, but she looked my friend up and down very coldly. She asked me how we met, and I told her we just met in Pattaya and let it go at that. I hired another Suzuki and we did another day trip to another location, but one of the girls declined to come this time. On the final day, I had the same agreement with Pun that I would leave my bag at her shop until my train departed and we would meet up at the night market. When I arrived at her shop, the shop was shut and there was no sign of Pun to be seen. With my lack of culture and being insensitive, I had no idea she was major annoyed with me. When I arrived home, I sent her a letter to see if she was okay. Very quickly, I received back an angry letter back saying that if I wanted her forgiveness, I would need to send her 3,000 baht for a sinus operation. I believed her that the money was for an operation, but I was not sure why I needed her forgiveness, and I had never responded to her. A few years later, I received an email advising me that she had opened a Thai travel agency in Chiang Mai, and if I was ever up there, I should drop in. I have never been back to Chiang Mai. I hope she did well with the business. Okay, right, no comments on that one again. I'm going to jump straight into story number 5 because I've still got a little bit more to go. I had an interesting experience with Thai immigration when I left after exceeding my 30-day visa free period by 1 day. I knew I wanted to spend at least 30 days in Thailand, then possibly extend and stay a few extra weeks. I have travelled to Thailand before on a one-way ticket, then purchased my onward leg once in Thailand. I never found arriving on a one-way ticket a problem from the Thai's perspective. However, it caused an irritation and once at the European departure point where I was questioned by a non-Thai airline check-in staff about my onward intentions. I was using a ticket to get to Bangkok and was the return leg of a Bangkok-Frankfurt return ticket, but by using the leg back to Bangkok, it would appear in Europe that I was going one way to Bangkok. This time around, to avoid that possible irritation on leaving Europe, I purchased a ticket from Bangkok to Australia. As it turned out, there was no issue at check-in. I purchased my onward ticket out of Thailand to Australia for a 30-day stay in Thailand. However, on arrival and looking at the entry stamp, I realised the date chosen put me on at 31 days. I thought it is not a problem as since COVID all Thai Airways tickets are fully changeable and I intend to change it and stay an extra 2 weeks. During my stay, I went online to change my ticket from Bangkok to Australia before going to immigration to pay for an extra extension, but I found it was not possible to change it as Thai Airways classed it as a special fare, which couldn't be rearranged. It was a case of use it or lose it. So now I was in the situation that I had a ticket leaving Bangkok at 6:30 p.m. the day after my 30-day visa-free stay expired. I went to immigration in Phuket to apply and pay for an extension costing a few thousand baht simply to do the right thing and not overstay by a few hours. Phuket immigration told me not to worry, just go to the airport and pay a 500 baht fine as it was not worth paying the higher extension fee, and they assured me it would have no negative consequences for me. Sure enough, on my departure day, the immigration check, I was politely asked to follow the officer to a booth right down the end of the line. The officer in the other booth took my passport while his colleague explained the situation. The second officer inspected all the entry-exit stamps. I had a 500 baht note out in front of him and said, I have to pay you 500 baht as I overstayed a day to catch my flight. I intended to apply for an extension, but my airline ticket cannot be modified, so I can't change it to go a day earlier and I can't extend to stay in Thailand. The officer smiled and said, Mister, you do not worry about it. You never overstayed before. He put a stamp with some Thai writing in the passport, initialed it, and there was a number 1 written in it. Okay, so I'll just explain a little bit where that's coming from. In the old days, you could overstay. So if you came in on a 30-day tourist non-exempt for a visa and you overstayed by a few days, you had a fine system. So what would happen? You'd go to check out at the airport, the old Dong Mueang airport especially, and say you'd stayed 3 or 4 days, and there was a fee of 500 baht a day, and it was just a case of pay for each day you'd overstayed, and that was the end of it. There was no kind of record put into a computer into the airport systems. only that you'd paid. And there were guys who'd come out here and stay for 6 weeks on a 30-day because they could afford the extra 14 days at 500 baht, 7,000 baht. So they'd come out and think, I want to stay here for 6 weeks, adjust their tickets and stay for 6 weeks, but not do anything about the visa. And it wasn't a problem. They just paid the money and that was the end of it. But it's not like that nowadays. You know, you shouldn't overstay. And even by one day, it might appear that it's not a problem, but you're always going to remain in the system. And that brings up a red flag. So although when you come back into the kingdom, you know, if everything was done properly, you paid a fine and they let you go, there will be something in the system. And now for the last sort of year or two, what they've started to do, if you overstay by any length of time, they ban you from the country. The first ban will be for a year, and then I think it's 5 years, 10 years, and then forever, depending on how long you're overstayed. I remember a while ago, say a couple of years ago now, I remember there was a story about a German tourist who'd come out here on a 30-day non-exempt stamp, and he was fairly, I wouldn't say wealthy, but he had enough money to survive probably for the rest of his life. He was fairly elderly at that time, 65 plus. And he'd met a Thai girl from Isan, and they decided to move back to Isan. He bought a house, a cheap house, and he just thought, well, I don't need to bother with visas anymore. And he just didn't bother anymore. And when the immigration eventually caught him, I can't remember the reason why they caught him, but they did. They weren't actively looking for him, but something happened with his passport, and they found out he was overstaying. He'd actually overstayed by about 14 years, so they arrested him. They deported him, but his life here in Thailand had ended. You know, he had a wife and, well, live-in wife, not they hadn't done a ceremony, you know, and a child, and that was it. You know, he couldn't come back in. So it's not very wise to overstay. There's plenty of ways you can extend your visa for another month. It's not expensive if you use an agent. Right, okay, so let's go into this isn't a story. Well, it is and it isn't. So a guy sent me this, a recent thing that happened to him. It's about being scammed. It's just a lot of red flags. I thought I'd read it out to you, and it might help you if you're coming here for the first time in the next few weeks or so. Okay, so I'm in Bangkok now, and just last night got scammed so easily. I saw it coming, but too late. I met a girl 37 on Thai Friendly. I told her my location. She said usual stuff, etc. Long story, but I was scammed by her so easily. Basically, she whisked me in a taxi to a Thai restaurant, ordered everything you can think of, plus red wine at 2,500 baht, saying I only drink that. Chemistry was brilliant, etc. I paid a big bill, and then she said there is a show on in walking distance. Would you like it? Claiming now she wanted to go. 5 minutes walk, we were in, dancers on, etc. She ordered a bottle of wine again, red. They brought food, as in snacks, nothing much, melon, pineapple, a little others. I noticed a Thai man sat on the same table as us. She said he's a manager. Anyway, after one bottle of wine, she was given all the right signals, dancing, etc., and eye contact. Time to leave around 12 a.m. The bill came. I was in shock. 12,500 baht. Ridiculous. She said, don't embarrass me. I'll lose face. I was out of money, so I had to go to an ATM. So I thought, anyway, she's coming to my hotel, so you pay for what you get. No? Taxi driver came and I got in. She said her daughter was hungry at home and told the taxi driver to drop me off at the hotel. The Thai guy came outside with her changed civilian clothes. Obviously, her boyfriend. Can you see how it happened? I think the boyfriend bought a fake bill and just gave it to her for me to pay. So a lot of red flags there. You know, the guy obviously, he went out and he thought he was going to have a good time. She's obviously very, very attractive. But, you know, she's led him to these places, and probably the boyfriend paid the genuine bill, which was probably 1,000 baht maximum, presented this false bill, which was 12,500. So they had a very nice payday. So just be very, very careful. Okay, right, that's it for me today, waffling on as usual. Just a quick reminder, if you haven't checked out the live streams yet, Thai time, they're at 9 p.m. till about 10:30. That's for everybody. And then I do a member stream at 10:45 till about midnight. They're a lot of fun. A lot of guys come in, and we have a good time in there. I'd love to see you in the live chat with me on Sunday. Okay, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all again next week for a brand new run of stories.